So let me start out by saying I never really liked Steve very much. He was the type of person who got under my skin, or maybe I should say I let him get under my skin. He was immature and middle-aged, which bothered the shit out of me. He was someone who always needed all the attention in the room, all the time. And he did this by being a contrarian and then telling these fantastic yarns about himself. Some of the things I've heard Steve say on numerous occasions are that he was the first person he knew of to be a vegan. And this evolved into Steve started the Vegan Society in Brooklyn. So something else Steve claimed is that he read the Lord of the Rings 3 times in Latin. The other thing he said, and stick with me because this is tough to explain, is Steve claimed to have created this amazing, fantastic music. And the reason we couldn't hear it, or we couldn't read it on sheet music, was because it was so complicated and so technologically advanced that Steve, it couldn't be produced. So we could only hear it in Steve's head. Now, Steve was a little overweight. He parted his hair in the middle, longish, likely the same style he had in high school. And he sported a very large, ridiculously bushy mustache without a beard. Sort of like John Bolton, if you know who he is. So Stephen and I were neighbors. We lived in Park Slope on 10th Street in the mid-90s. And I knew Steve because he was outside in front of his building smoking all the time. And I mean all the time, in all kinds of weather. Like a postman who delivers packages, but except he was delivering nicotine to his body. Now, once I passed Steve wearing a suit, Steve said, "Nice suit. You never catch me wearing one of those." For weeks afterwards, Steve would say, "Where's your suit?" every time I passed. Up your ass, I wanted to say. But I didn't, because Steve was always standing next to his girlfriend, his living girlfriend, I should say, Susan. Now, Susan was nice enough. She was similar to Steve in the sense that she was also somewhat overweight. They dressed the same. They wore jeans and t-shirts, usually, or flannel shirts, always jackets, never overcoat. And Susan she never agreed or disagreed, let's say, to Steve's pronouncements, but she often giggled. And she glanced at me sideways as if to say, "I know. I love him anyway." So it was a very warm Saturday in December. And my niece from Long Island, my 11-year-old niece, was over, and we were playing hide and seek in my apartment. She was hiding and I was seeking when the doorbell rang. And it was Susan. And Susan was very upset. Something had happened to Steve. Could I please come over? And I asked, "What happened to Steve?" He fell down. So I yelled, "Stephanie, could you come out, please? I have to run next door." So nothing, because Stephanie was a gamer and she wasn't going to fall for that. This is hide and seek. "Jim, I really need you," was Susan, and she was almost crying now. I said, "Okay, Steph, I gotta run next door. I'll be right back, babe." So as on the way to Susan's house, she said that she had gone out to pick up their dry cleaning for only 10 minutes. When she got back, she noticed Steve was laying unconscious and on their living room floor. My first thought was, what do you guys have that needs to be dry cleaned? Nuts. And then I asked her, I said, have you called an ambulance? She said she had. So we went into her building and up the stairs to the apartment, and at the entrance, 10 feet away, I could see Steve laying there, and he wasn't breathing. His skin was gray, and I thought he was dead. And Susan must have seen the same thing because she immediately wailed, very loud crying. And I said, Susan, go outside and wait in front of the building for the ambulance, just so they don't pass by. And Susan turned and she just yelled, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, as she went down the stairs. Now I walked towards Steve, I stood over him, and I thought about what I had learned in junior high school, in 7th grade health class to be specific, and it was mouth to mouth is what we called it. I hate to say it, but this was 1972. So, and I thought about this, and then I looked at Steve's ridiculous fucking mustache. And I probably hesitated for half a second, but I mean, I knew what I had to do. So I got down and I knelt next to Steve and I tilted his head back and I opened his mouth and I breathed as hard as I could into his mouth. And the air went in and it came right out in a wheeze, and it sounded like death to me. I breathed in again, put my, the whole thing in. And breathe in, and the air came out, and it was a wheeze, and Steve wasn't responding. So then I did chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was an EMT. And behind him were firemen and police until the room was full. Probably 15 men were in the room. And I turned and saw Susan sitting on the couch. I don't know if she saw me trying to revive Steve or not, but I sat next to her and she had her hands in her face and she was crying, and the men were over there working on Steve and doing whatever they were doing, and I put my arms around Susan and just held her, and maybe after a minute or two I said, Susan, I just got to go back and check on my niece. And Susan wailed, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'll be right back. I went, took my niece to a neighbor's house, came right back to Susan, and Susan was no longer crying, but she was just staring. And she couldn't see Steve because the men were all standing in front of him, they were working on him, and everything was happening in the apartment. And you could hear the defibrillator and the high-pitched sound that it makes before it goes off, and it was pandemonium, but she was just staring. And maybe 10 minutes went by, and the EMT who originally came up to us and looked at us both and said, I'm sorry. And Susan just wailed and put her head back and said, no, oh my God, no. He didn't get the chance to finish. That was, I'm sorry. We did everything we could. We tried our best, but we couldn't revive him. And at that point, I just held Susan. I didn't know what to say or what to do. And eventually, the men started filing out of her apartment. And as they filed out, not all of them, but some of them said, I'm sorry for your loss. And somehow a social worker showed up and verified that, asked Susan, do you have anyone? Or asked me, am I going to stay there for a while? And I have to be honest with you, I was hoping that I didn't have to stay there for a while, but she didn't have anyone, I didn't think, but it turns out she had a friend coming from Harlem who was on her way, which was, I have to tell you, I was so relieved to hear that. Anyway, I sat there with Susan and I didn't know what to say. Usually you say something nice about the deceased, so you tell a funny story. And I didn't like Steve. So, we made small talk, and sometimes I think we talked about where she was from and how long she'd been in Brooklyn. then she would cry some, and I would hold her, and it was awkward. But I did it, and I mean, long story short, her friend came, and they hugged, and Susan thanked me for being there, and her friend thanked me for being there, and I said something ridiculously stupid like, "No problem, anytime." And I left. And so, I guess, the best way to end this is to go back to Steve, because I completely forgot this has happened, probably for 15 or 20 years. This has been a long time, and a friend of mine told me about a similar experience they had, and I went, "Holy shit, that happened to me as well," and it came back to me. And after I've told the story to a few people since then, and I've since found out that the conventional wisdom, the medical opinion is that you no longer have to do mouth to mouth. So you just do, for an adult, chest compressions. So I mean, the best I could say is that when Steve was alive, he was annoying, and when Steve died, he was annoying. And 25 years later, Steve was still annoying.